wrapping up the semester, and one of the final topics that I want to talk about is abnormal psychology. And when talking about abnormal psychology, one question that always comes up is there someone who is completely abnormal or has an abnormal set of psychologies? And one way to think about this is there anyone who is purely evil, as an example, someone who uh, has true malice for someone? And so I kind of wanted to go over this topic with you and talk about a unique individual that does exist within society. They're called psychopaths. In some circles in sociology and whatnot, they're called sociopaths. It's kind of an interchangeable term. Sometimes sociopaths are also uh, termed antisocial personality, but I like the term psychopath because it's really an individual who has an individual issue. So it's psycho within the individual. So I kind of want to go over this type of individual so that you can see how they differ from other individuals who suffer from some type of abnormality, such as a psychological disorder or someone who is suffering from a source of trauma. As you will see in the next section when I talk about violence, much of the violence committed is not done by someone who is, say, AK evil in their heart. It is committed by someone who has received a wrong against them in some way, for example. So someone who has extreme hatred for another group, or someone who has had trauma after trauma after trauma, and they just cannot take those traumas anymore, so they aggress against society. And so we will see, or aggress towards another individual, and I'll provide some examples of that. But there is a subset of individuals, it's about 1 to about 4% of the population, that does fit the definition of someone who is purely evil, that would take advantage of someone without concern for their well-being or for who they are. And so let's explore this individual. Um, but first, let's set up a criterion for what it would mean for someone to be truly evil. And when we talk about evilness, we're talking about someone who would harm someone psychologically, destroy someone morally, um, and harm someone physically. And in this case, when we're talking about evilness, they do it without regard to the individual. So, what would need to happen for someone to be in that state? And there's about 4 tests that we would need have in order for someone to do that, to be in that type of mindset as a human being. The first test would be that they would need to lack a theory of mind and a mentalizing ability. If we go back to our conversations in the developmental sections, if you remember, theory of mind is something that occurs around the 36th month of development, right? And it is when 2 unique things happen, especially for human beings. Some other species, elephants, dolphins, other primates also have this ability, but humans take it to another certain level. Is that one, we are capable of self-reflection, so we can look in the mirror and recognize that that's us and not some other person. How this is kind of tested is while an infant or an animal is asleep, you put a colorless, an odorless colored dye on their forehead. And when the animal or human wakes up, you put a mirror in front of their face, kind of, and if they recognize that that's them, then they'll be curious about this new color thing on their forehead, and they'll rub it, or they'll do something to try and figure out what that is. Um, and what we find is that humans, elephants, dolphins, other primates will uh, rub their head or try and figure out what that is. Dogs, cats, other fish, and the like. They don't recognize it. Hence, they don't. But self recognition, this starts to occur between about 24 to 36 months of age. The other thing that begins at around this age group is not only do we start to recognize ourself, and we start to be able to do what's called self-reflection, so we can think about our own existence. Okay, theory of mind, theory of me. Okay, is because I can recognize my own self, I can also recognize that the person across from me has their own unique them, their own theory of mind that is separate from mine. So I can start doing things like perspective taking. So I can recognize that their experiences are different from mine. I can recognize that while I may be happy, they may be sad, and their experience may be different from me, and that's okay. So, and this develops between about 24 to 36 months of age. There's about 16 tests that test for this part of theory of mind, and the majority of humans develop this theory of mind, and there's two groups that don't. Uh, Psychopaths, no psychopath that we're aware of pass these tests, even into adulthood. You can take a 42-year-old psychopath, and they cannot pass these simple tests that were designed for 24-month to 36-month-old children. Um, and children with autism. Now, we got to put this in a separate category altogether. I'm not really getting into autism in this course. I do want to note it's different for children with autism. Autism is a social disorder, and so it's not surprising that this doesn't develop, but it doesn't make an autistic child psychopathic, and I just want to make that clear. But also, only about 60% of children with autism don't develop theory of mind, 40% do. And so children with autism, the probability of development of theory of mind is questionable, and we're not sure why some children with autism do and some don't develop theory of mind. So that's a, but I'm not getting into autism in this course. If you're going to take developmental psychology next semester, Psych 240 will get into that in that course. And so if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to take that class. But getting back to psychopaths fail this test 1. Test 2 is you have to lack empathy, and we could put 2 and 3 together: lack empathy and lack conscientiousness. Empathy is this ability to understand the emotional states of other people, and it goes back to theory of mind and the mentalizing system. It goes back to, because they don't have the ability to take on perspectives of other people, they're not able to really understand that other people have emotions that are separate than them. So for a psychopath, it confuses them when people react differently than they do, have different emotions than what they do. In fact, much of what they do is acting. They have to act love. They have to play emotions because they don't understand their own and they don't understand others. And so they can't really empathize with others. They also lack conscientiousness, meaning that they really are callous in a lot of ways. That you have to have callousness. You don't care if someone else is taken care of. You're not concerned with if you're going to make someone do something, what that consequence is going to be for that individual, and that's really what conscientiousness is. And you view others as objects rather than people. So when psychopaths look at another human being, they don't see a human being standing there. What they see is they see a pen, a pencil, a rock, a car. They see other people not as humans, but as things to consume, as objects to be used, much like any other object that is non-human in the environment. And so psychopaths fail all four of these tests, and therefore they tend to uh, meet the criteria to be purely evil. Now, most of our information about psychopaths comes from the study of serial killers. So I'm going to talk about serial killers and psychopaths together in this lecture to kind of give you a round picture of what psychopathy is and give you the violent side of psychopathology. Now, I do have to say, not all psychopaths are serial killers, but all serial killers are psychopathic. And we also have to separate true psychopaths from psychopathic tendencies. There's different measures that measure people's tendencies towards psychopathic mindsets and those types of things. People who have psychopathic tendencies still have the ability to empathize, theory of mind, stuff like that, but they're also able to shut their emotions down very quickly. And so they do come across psychopathically. Narcissists probably fit this category very well. Um, People in corporate offices often score high in this. CEOs of corporations and CFOs of corporations score high on a lot of these scales because in those positions you have to be able to uh, tread over other human beings for financial gains, so they tend to do well in those types of positions. So there are things called psychopathic tendencies, but those can be shut off. But for a person who is a true psychopath, there is no shutting off the psychopathic side of the individual, and so I want to make that clear. Now, identifying psychopaths, especially in the prison system, not schism, the best tool we have is the Hare psychopathic checklist, and this has been validated over and over and over. Basically, the way that it works is you go through, and I have to say, you have to do a complete psychosocial history, starting with the individual's childhood, clear up through adulthood. You have to explore every aspect of the individual's life to score this thing. So while it looks very simple, it is based on an immense amount of data, because the way this thing works is that you have to indicate these items consistently throughout the individual's life. And I'll give you some examples why this is, because if you look through this list of 20 items, you'll probably notice some things and you might go, well, I'm a bit impulsive or I'm a bit irresponsible. But I would be willing to bet that if you do have those tendencies, that you're not impulsive in all areas of your life, and you're not irresponsible in all areas of your life. Okay, so For example, I tend to be a very impulsive buyer, uh, but I am not very impulsive when it comes to other things. Um, and so I would score a 0 on that one because I'm not impulsive in many of the domains in my life. And so you have to do a complete psychosocial history of the individual to truly score this. And so you go through. 0 means that it's not present uh, in any of the it's not present in um, 0 is that it's not present, or it's present in a few of the domains of life but not many. A score of 1 would be that it's present more than 50% of the time in domains of an individual's life but not 100%. 2 would be that it's present in all domains of the life. And if you do the math, 2 times 20 is 40, so the maximum score on the scale would be 40. So most of us, thankfully, I'm hoping in this class, would score between a 3 and a 6, because we'd see a few of these that we do, more than 50% of the time, probably. I see one in here that I do more than 50% of the time. But for the most part, we go through this list and we go, okay, I do 1 or 2 of them, so I'd score 1 on one of these, but probably not many. Okay, and so the majority of people score between a 3 or 6. Most criminals that are non-violent criminals, especially, so people on drug crimes, theft, money crimes, score between about a 16 to a 22. Uh, and when we say that these individuals, these are individuals who are serious lifelong criminals. Most of the other ones who just got caught for a first time or just not career criminals usually score less than a 16. In fact, they score more in our range. But career criminals tend to score between 16 to 22. Now we have to get into the difference between someone with an antisocial personality disorder and someone who is psychopathic. Okay, antisocial personality disorder is a developmental personality disorder where someone who either has been raised and indoctrinated to aggress towards society, or it's been someone who has been wronged so many times by their community, by their this, that they've just become a violent individual and they aggress. Chronic domestic abusers fit this category. People who are in gangs fit this category. People who continually commit violent crimes tend to fit this category the most. What sets them aside from psychopaths is that this is a disorder. These people are able to love, they're able to empathize, they're able to have conscientiousness, they're able to care for others. Um, but once you get above that 30 is when you get into the psychopathic range where love is very confusing. Empathy doesn't exist. All of those emotions, those human emotions, those things that make us human don't exist, and that's psychopathology. Antisocial personality can be treated. Psychopathology cannot. And this is something that is interesting in the research is psychopathology is not treatable, and in fact, in what research shows is that putting a psychopath in a group treatment actually makes the group worse, not better. And most psychopaths use treatment to learn their skill better because they have to learn how to empathize. And what a better place to do that than to learn it from a therapist. And um, so psychopathology, not treatable. Antisocial personality is treatable if the person is wanting to change. And that's an important part of treatment. So, just some things we should know about psychopathology is there is some neurological findings and some developmental attributions. Neurologically, we do find some dysfunction in the paralimbic system. Basically, we find that the connections that inhibit impulse are missing between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. And so I know I used this example earlier in the semester when we talked about biological psychology, but basically when you go and you're angry and you go to slap someone, but you stop yourself, that is the prefrontal cortex inhibiting your limbic system. And there's a certain neural tracts that are doing that in your brain. And we find through brain imaging that psychopaths are missing those neural tracks. From a developmental perspective, as I said, theory of mind is missing. And some of the reasons we think theory of mind is missing, and probably what creates this neurological dysfunction, is there is some evidence of genetics. Psychopathology does tend to run in families, but we find that most psychopaths were born to families that didn't want the child, or they were in families where the parents were psychologically, emotionally, and a lot of times physically not available, or were very abusive. But in most cases of psychopathology, literally the mom didn't want anything to do with the infant. During pregnancy, the mother would do anything to abort the child, next to not getting legal abortions, such as taking excessive laxatives, falling down, beating the stomach, all these different awful things, just not going and actually getting the legal abortion. At the hospital, after giving birth, the mother refuses to even see the infant, and you see a lack of bonding, a complete lack of bonding at the hospital. And so this family dysfunction and this inability to attach starts very early, and we think that this is the major reason for the development of psychopathology. And so psychopath children, so do psychopaths meet the criteria for mental illness? They actually don't. If you look back at our definitions of psychopathologies, psychopaths don't think they hurt anyone else or people are harmed by them. They do not think that there's something wrong by them. And so psychopathology is not in a mental health manual or in a diagnostic manual, because psychopath does not meet the definition of mental illness. Other aggressive conduct disorder is a childhood version of antisocial personality disorder, and those do meet the definition because they do see harm to themselves, harm to others. They see the clinical onset and the symptoms, and they're treatable. So I think that's where I'm going to stop on this lecture of psychopathology. I was going to get into serial killers, but I think that's where I want to stop for now, because I just wanted to make the point that there are individuals in this world that are not treatable. There is this thing we call psychopathology. It makes up 1 to 4% of our population, and but these individuals are unique to other individuals that we'll explore that create violent crime, which is where we're headed.